Hello, everyone. I am so thrilled to bits to be talking to Dr. Arthur Flippin, who I've known for many years. And he has done a lot of amazing things in life, and will want him to share some highlights with us. But before we do, I do want to say I really appreciate the time, and every time I have a conversation with you, I walk away so much more knowledgeable. So I'm thrilled that we are talking today.
That's a very kind compliment. Thank you very much. And the feeling is likewise. We have known each other for several years, but it seems the time has gone by very fast. So it means you must have enjoyed doing something, maybe just talking to one another.
So tell us a little bit about your background. You were at Kaiser. Neurology is your thing, right?
Neurology is my specialty. I came to San Diego and to join it's the Southern California Permanente Medical Group, which is a physician component of Kaiser Permanente. It's actually separate from the insurance company and the hospitals and that, but that's a whole different conversation. And I came right out of residency. I did my neurology training at the University of Arizona, went to medical school back east, and spent some time in the Air Force before going into residency. So I came here with the idea that I wanted to hone my clinical practice. And to be honest, I did not want to try to manage a business of going into private practice at the same time. And I figured I'd be there for a couple of years, but it turned out I retired at the end of 2009 after 33 years there. And I enjoyed my clinical practice a great deal. It was a great place to practice and not have to worry about being a business person until I got appointed to an administrative position, which is what I did my last 9 years. And that's all I did. So, but neurology is something I still enjoy. As a neurologist, you cannot walk down the street without looking at someone. And, if you notice a little gait irregularities or some change in speech pattern, particularly with speech, you wonder if that's just an accent or they have a neurologic disorder. But that's only if they're from Boston, but that's a whole different thing. No.
I must do a lot of red flags for you, because no
No.
matter where I go, people think I'm not from there. Because I've lived in so many different places, my accent is completely foreign to everyone.
You're traveling the world the way you do. That's great, and I think that's a whole different story. But no, I think as a physician, particularly in neurology, much of what we do is observation.
Right.
Because unfortunately, it is a specialty where it is kind of that link between medical problems or neurologic complications and medical diseases with the brain and spinal cord and muscles. And sometimes we see symptoms from those who have a psychiatric disorder posing as a neurologic disorder. So we have to be able to look at a bigger picture, I think, than some of the other specialties do.
Yeah. And something you just said, I think a lot of us who have had to deal with dementia in our families think about a lot is, what are some of those early signs of dementia? How can we tell if someone's going down that path?
It can be very subtle. And if it's a family member, the saying, sometimes you cannot see the forest for the trees. It may be very subtle, and an outsider may not notice the first time. They may just notice, say, a spark of vitality that had been present in someone that they've known for a long time may not be there.
Oh,
They may just not be as perky and as sharp. Or then you notice forgetfulness. You may notice a subtle change in their behavior. For example, where someone may have been very polite and easygoing. Now there's a change. And maybe they're a little more short-tempered, a
Huh.
little less forgiving, a little more impulsive behavior you may sometimes see. Forgetfulness, of course. All these things you see, and it's typically over time that we're a family member or physician or someone else will gradually put all these things together and say, wait a minute, this person has changed.
Hmm.
This person has changed. I had a former colleague, unfortunately, who did not develop Alzheimer's, but another rare disease that causes dementia. And he seemed to be doing fine. And then as they look back, they realize that, he seemed to be okay with patients, but he wasn't documenting the way he was supposed to before. He was forgetting to do things that were pretty normal for him.
Hmm.
So it's it can be very difficult, and often you see some subtle changes that may be just a bad day. All of us have bad days.
That's
Some
true.
days we are going to get, if you haven't had enough sleep and there's a lot of stress going on, you're going to be forgetful.
Yeah.
But that is temporary usually. But when you see this continue to persist and persist, you have to worry.
Hmm.
And particularly as we get older, because the biggest risk factor for dementia is age, and particularly when
Yeah.
you look at Alzheimer's.
So we talked about age as a risk factor. What about genetic? Um,
It can occur in families, a very small incidence, probably less than 1%. I think when we spoke the other day, I said 2 or 3%, but I had to check myself on that. It's probably around 1%. I remember seeing an article recently that pointed out that they've so far discovered over 100 different genes that may be related. So it makes it very difficult to point at one particular um, problem that is the cause of what's going on. A lot of what we're doing and what is being done in research is focused on the development of amyloid, which is an abnormal protein that you see deposits of it in the brains of patients with Alzheimer's. You also see it in the brains of patients who are older, may not be demented, but the changes are there also. And there's another abnormality, an abnormal protein that's deposited in some of the neurons, some of the brain cells. Again, you see it more commonly in patients with Alzheimer's, but you can see it in elderly patients who are not demented and continuing to function. So a lot of research has been focused on the amyloid and the called neurofibrillary tangles. We don't have a cure yet. We have some things that slow it down, but I think there's always a question: is there something else going on? And I think I've gone off on a tangent, so please bring me back.
no,
Okay.
but it's interesting because a lot of people, I think, especially if you've not been exposed to dementia, think of forgetfulness is the only thing that's related to dementia. But you were talking about how you might have mood swings and you might be more irritable. You generally don't think about those things as contributing or result of dementia, right?
That is true, and of course, depression.
Oh,
Depression untreated may mimic dementia.
huh,
You see a
okay.
change in behavior, their memory may be gone. These people just aren't their normal selves. And whenever someone presents with signs and symptoms of dementia, what in neurology, what we have to do is exclude other things too. Like, is
Okay.
there a history of head trauma? Uh, have they had a stroke? Have they had multiple strokes? Do they have something growing in the head that may be benign, may be malignant? Is there some metabolic? Are they diabetic? And their sugars are out of control for a long enough period of time that's caused damage? Or is their thyroid function? The thyroid gland is not functioning normally. There's a lot of different things that come into play. Hence, that tie-in between would be considered internal medicine and neurology and the brain and so forth.
So that's interesting, because what you just said led me to think that dementia is something that can really not be treated, whereas all the other diseases that might be causing you forgetfulness and some of the dementia type symptoms could be treated with medication. Is that
And,
true,
and,
or is there any medication now for dementia reduction?
and it's an excellent point. And when we look at dementia now, despite some recent developments and new medications on the market that seem to slow down the course of the disease, these people who have Alzheimer's, these medications may, aducanumab is one of them, and I can't remember the other one, may slow down the decline. So instead of having a decline like this, heaven forbid, it may slow it so the slope is different. But unfortunately, when they come off the medication, it goes back to that decline. We don't have a cure for it. We have things that may control the symptoms, but no cure for it yet. Yet, if you have an underlying medical condition, say your thyroid function is low, replacing that thyroid hormone may bring someone back to normal or very close to normal. And I mean, obviously, if they've had a stroke and had injury to the brain, that part of the brain may be gone, but we may be able to prevent different ones, newer ones from coming on.
That sounds a lot more complex than I had thought about, but yeah, yes, that's why we have you here today. All right. So, what can we do at an individual level to reduce our chances of dementias, especially if we feel like we've got some family history of it and we're scared that we don't want to go down that path?
Oh boy. See, what can we do? It's a whole spectrum of things. I think the first thing for dementia and other problems of aging, heart disease, is to one, try to live a healthy life, stay physically active. If you consume alcohol, don't consume to excess, don't smoke, don't do drugs. You don't involve those things where you can bang your head around. I would not advocate professional football for anyone, though it's fun to watch. The brain, I tell my patients, the brain is inside a thick skull for a reason. It does not tolerate being banged around very well. In short terms, yes, but if you do it repeatedly. So and sleep is absolutely critical. Sleep is a vital function of brain health because it's the time when the brain kind of regenerates itself, how it processes memory and that, so it seems. So getting adequate sleep helps. Maintaining an adequate diet. There are people who on fad diets or unfortunately in situations where they have no choice may end up with deficiencies of certain vitamins and chemicals, and that may alter brain development and brain function as well. Physical activity, I think, is important. I think it's important for all of us. Being physically active is what we as human beings are probably meant to do. And even in patients who develop dementia, if they're able to maintain some level of physical activity, their rate of decline seems to be slower than those who cannot. But unfortunately, sometimes these conditions either cause or what they progress to a point where they're not able to be physically active. But I think those things, diet, sleep, exercise, staying away from bad habits, and that I think for right now, that's what we can do as people. Now, obviously, there's some socioeconomic conditions that may play a role, and that's a more of a societal factor in itself. And not to make light of it, but living in a war zone, if you're able to survive that part, there's going to be a long-term impact with that. Not having enough to eat, not having enough to drink, all those play a role.
So that's wow. So
Yeah, I've been called a bummer sometimes, just having conversations.
No, you're
So,
making us think. You're making us think. So, I mean, I think you touched upon some things that we can do as a society to try and reduce dementia. Um, what can healthcare providers and payers and pharma and biotech companies, what are they currently doing, or is there any focus that's being put on dementia to reduce or the symptoms of dementia as well as, reverse dementia? Is there any innovation going on with any of those?
Well, in that latter category, there's a lot of pharmaceutical research going on looking at um, affecting or taking patients who have early signs of cognitive impairment, those we call with MCI, mild cognitive impairment, begin to treat them now because oftentimes they will progress to Alzheimer's. Are there treatments available that may slow that down? See, so they don't go into Alzheimer's and even improve. There's a lot of work being done in that. So thank goodness, and hopefully they will continue to do it and they'll come out with products that will work and will be affordable. The insurance industry is that's I think more focused on acute care. As our population grows, it I don't want to put it. I think there needs to be more resources developed in education to family and family members to help them understand that it is an issue and that there need to be resources available, education available to help. That's a, in much of the world, when someone gets to the point where they're no longer able to live alone or function alone, there's generally family that will take them. And that is a little bit that's different than what we're like in this country. So
Yeah,
but clearly there are families who take care of but many times, and particularly as we get older with um, a generation that does not have children,
yeah,
or heaven forbid you outlive you, what is going to happen to you at that point? And it's
mm,
expensive. It's very expensive. I mean, to go into a memory care unit or skilled nursing facility is very expensive. You're
yeah,
talking thousands of dollars a month,
yeah,
and you may have insurance, but you may outlive your insurance.
yeah.
So I think that's something that we as a society have to face up to and deal with, but we're not real good at that. That's
No.
an editorial, that's a political comment, but I'll back away now, please. Don't send me letters. Send it to Yasmin.
You
um,
talked about caregivers, so I want to kind of go there a little bit
mhm,
further because, my mom had some dementia and my grandfather had Alzheimer's, and
uh-huh,
I think of all the diseases that probably affect the caregiver the most, dementia is probably way up high because
absolutely.
not having your loved one not be able to recognize you and getting upset with you. I mean, the only time in my life my mom said anything negative to me
Oh
was
boy.
in one of those episodes, and she said to me, "I hate you." And I had to step back and realize it wasn't her. That's not her true feeling. And to be able to talk to yourself and say and separate your loved one from their behavior can be really hard. So what advice do you have for caregivers?
Well, something you said there at the end, to be able to step away and recognize that this is not the loved one that you knew in the past. It is so critical. It is because it is extremely hard. It's extremely hard to see this person no longer be there. So I think the caregiver has to have patience, and the caregiver has to have a caregiver. The caregiver, not necessarily someone to be there with them, but someone who can serve as a shoulder to cry on, an ear, not to be metaphorical, but an ear to talk to, someone to listen to you in that. because there's a book, I don't remember the author, called The 36-Hour Day, because it's like having a baby,
Yeah.
but who can walk and talk, and sometimes just you can't get them to stop doing it because they're adults and they may not realize what they're doing. So an incredible amount of patience. Some hate to have them go at it alone. So a support system for them, but that support system also includes um, some training, some education as to what they're looking at. I mean, you and I, with our experiences, and those of us who've had some medical background or worked in healthcare settings will have some idea, but I don't think any of us will have it until we're actually there on the ground. But someone who has never had to deal with this, they're always busy doing, always busy working, and this is a whole new thing for them. It can be just earth-shattering. So some type of support, some type of education. What to recognize, for example, if I mean, just because someone is demented doesn't mean they can't get sick. How can you? What signs should you look for that may suggest that this person maybe has an underlying illness? Maybe they have some infection, their fevers. Maybe they're have some signs and symptoms of heart failure. What kind of simple things can they look at so they know to call for help at that time?
UTI is a big thing in with older
UTIs are
people,
huge.
right?
UTIs are huge thing. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
UTIs can kill people.
Yeah.
Not so much because of the infection in the urinary tract system, but those bacteria get out into the general system and becomes a septicemia that can be fatal very easily.
Yeah.
And going into the hospital, when the minute patients go into the hospital, they don't do well. Cognitively, awareness may decline abruptly because it's a strange, threatening situation for them.
Yeah.
So oftentimes it helps if a family member can stay there with them, but sometimes you can't do that.
Yeah.
And then
So
once they come out of the hospital, they may be so, and I'm sorry to cut you off, now you have the issue, what are you going to do post-hospital? They may not be well enough to come home right away, or well enough. Say if you've got an 85-year-old and they've got an 85-year-old spouse, the spouse might have been able to help take care of them when they were well. Now they're home and they're sick. That may be too much.
yeah. Yeah. So one last thing about the caregivers. I mean, when someone's having one of those episodes where they just don't remember anything and they
Mm.
remember, their past, is it, I don't know if there's any new research on this, but when I was going through it with my mom, I was advised not to try to convince her that my dad had actually passed away, which he had uh, at that time. She would say, "Bring your dad here," and I was told, don't argue with her and don't try to convince her in that moment that he is
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
alive anymore. Go into her reality and kind of respond. And I know you're lying at that time, but comforting them is more important than trying to get them straight on what facts are. Is that how we still see is the best way of tackling those situations?
Yes, and I think so. I think that the key thing then is not to get them agitated, not to make them more confused, more unsure of what's going around them, because then they get more agitated. And when they get more agitated, things just get worse. So try to calm them down. I've read or heard about there's a new process where they're actually kind of having communities of patients with dementia. So they go into this, and maybe it's not full time, but everyone else is there. And you have a place where you sit and eat, and you probably know more about it than I do. And that
Yes.
may be calming to them
Yes.
rather than, if they can get up and move around and do things rather than being kept pinned into a house and can't get out and things like that.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
uh, Yeah, go ahead, please. Sorry.
No. I mean, this session has been so wonderful, and I don't want to take a lot more of your time this time, but hopefully we can have another dialogue about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and all the other diseases at some point in time. And I just wanted to stop and say thank you so much for your time. You put things in perspective for me, which I hadn't thought about up until now. And go ahead.
Well, thank you. I'm glad I was able to help. I'm sorry I rambled on a little bit with that, but it's always a pleasure talking with you. And if I can be of help, I'll be happy to. And if I don't know the answer, I will let you know.